Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Christina Caesar, and I will be moderating today's session. Today's webinar will explore data loss prevention, which builds on some of our previous month's discussions around securing and preventing data from escaping your corporate environment. So, big topic. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded, and please make sure to send any questions through the Q&A function within Teams. Just a little bit about us, Synergy Technical is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have clients in over 70 countries in all 50 states and manage over 2 million licenses of Microsoft 365 for our clients through our licensing and managed services practice. In February 2020, we were actually awarded the Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year award. It's always such a mouthful. A large part of that success is the work done by today's presenter, Adrian Amos. So Adrian is one of our deep-level Microsoft security experts who has had the honor of running both productivity and security workshops at Microsoft Ignite. He's the perfect person to be leading today's webinar. He's literally our brain for all Microsoft security. So with that, Adrian, I will hand it off to you, and we can get this thing started. I know you have a lot that we're going over today.
Oh, I'm the brain. We're in trouble if that's the case. Thank you, Christina. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and steal your screen share here, and a slightly new version of the screen sharing thing. So let me know when you can see that for me.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, we're going to be covering data loss prevention today, and a couple of things about that are interesting. One is I tend to choose my webinar topics many months in advance. I kind of have just a sense of where things are going to go. You may recall that I wrote a security prognostication report at the beginning of the year. And in that, I covered some areas around Azure information protection. We've already covered that in a previous webinar. And I actually did pick DLP a while ago, so it was kind of interesting to me when I came in here just yesterday and clicked on the What's New in the Microsoft Compliance Center homepage, and it took me straight to information about DLP. So accidentally timely, I'll take it, but that's actually part of what we're actually going to be here to discuss is that DLP is part of the larger Microsoft 365 compliance offering. I mean, look at it. I mean, I couldn't have timed this any better. They totally set me up for this today. So if you've been doing DLP in the Microsoft cloud space for some time, or if you're brand new to it, fine. If you've been doing it, though, it's all moved. It used to all be in protection.office.com. The interface kept growing. There was a lot of stuff that kind of just kept getting added and added and added into it. About a year ago, maybe or so, we started to see this compliance.microsoft.com space popping up with Compliance Manager. We started to see some of this other stuff in here that like I said, we have covered a bit in previous sessions. But as of, I think this year, or maybe Ignite at last year, all of these solutions now live in this one space. So if you've done it in protection.office.com, you're now going to be working exclusively in compliance.microsoft.com. The other thing I'll say about today's session is that when I first chose this topic, I thought, how in the daggone world am I going to spend a webinar's worth of time talking about data loss prevention, right? When it's literally just a single line item in this here. But as I started digging into it and I started actually looking at the solutions that I've already presented on over time, there is a lot of there are a lot of different spaces in the Microsoft 365 stack that bear on DLP. And it really got me to thinking about the conversations I've had with people over time about what even is DLP, right? We have a lot of data. We don't want to lose any of it. And so therefore we want to prevent the loss of data. But in some places that can mean data at rest, data in transit, data on endpoints, data in our work streams, data in wherever we might have it, data even moving from an approved corporate workload to one that we trust, but we don't trust it in this way. So we need to have a lot of different ways to act on the accidental or intentional mishandling of data. And that's really what we're going after. So it's all living in this compliance.microsoft.com space. When we go there, we now have this great overview of things that are going on with our data. We can see that we can monitor third-party DLP. Now, granted, this is my demo tenant. There's not a whole lot of content in here. I did have this connected to a Box instance a month ago, but I turned it off to avoid, extra charging, and so now we don't have that in content. But there was stuff there a month ago. Anyway. We have DLP policy matches being surfaced up here, and some of these things can lag a little bit. They can take a little bit of time for this stuff to populate, but all of these basic information bits now are dropped into this main homepage. And we're going to cover some content in the data classification space, but obviously it's a great big glowing red target. Let's go look right at DLP. So this has actually grown a fair amount in the last 2 or 3 months. It used to just be that we could see overview, policies, and then magically earlier this year we got this endpoint DLP settings. But what's really nice about the whole Microsoft 365 stack and the way that we've tailored our communication workloads, honestly, since the dawn of Office 365, is we've had the ability to come in and define DLP overarching policies for our primary online workloads. And we've always been able to come in and simply click on create policy, and it would pre-select for us or give us a narrow range of options, whether we're looking at financial policies or privacy policies or medical and health policies. And this list has grown a lot over time. We've now got the ability to come in and scope this down to specific countries. So if we want to just quickly frame up a PCI DSS policy, we can literally just come through here and click on those 2 things, hit next. It'll pre-name it for us. I've already got one in this case, so it's not going to let me choose that one. But let's see. Here we go. Oh, well, no, it is going to. Oh, it is going to let me do it. Fantastic. All right. And then it's going to ask me which workloads I want to enact these protections in. Now, I don't have to really be an expert in PCI DSS. All I really need to know to get started here is that there are some types of sensitive information that I don't want being accidentally disclosed. And these are the workloads where I work with them. Maybe I want to be just monitoring for Exchange, and maybe I just want Teams chat channel messages. I don't need to turn on all these other things if I don't have them. Some of them won't show up. Cloud App Security, if you're not licensed for it, I don't believe will show up. But you can also now choose to monitor against on-premises repositories. Now, there is some configuration that has to happen with the on-premises repositories for that to happen. And incidentally, when they say repositories, what they really mean is SharePoint. They're not really saying go monitor all your file servers. But we can add all these things in. We can get very granular. We can exclude specific groups. We can exclude instances and repositories if we want to. We can turn it on, and then we end up with a list of basic policies that process in a predictable order, and they prevent accidental things from happening. We can go into any one of these things and look to see exactly how they're configured to work. And there's actually some interesting granularity in this. So inside of these spaces, we get the definition of what is the policy, what is it protecting against, where is it doing. But this is where it gets fun, is this policy settings, a low content versus a high content, high volume content. So if I dig into that a little bit, I'm going to try to dig into that a little bit. It's going to be a little bit slow. All right, so I have to actually kind of skip forward here. This policy is old and predates the creation of MCAS and Cloud App Security. So they're not added to this policy by default. Kind of a neat thing. If you do light up other workloads that can be monitored before you own, after you set up your policies, you may have to go back and add them in. Anyway, so we have the ability to take different actions based on how much content we see of these data types. And here we have an actual listing of the sensitive information types that are being assessed in this particular policy. And what is it that we want to assess for? Well, in this case, we want to assess for these sensitive information types being shared with people outside of my organization. And if it's a low volume, which we'll be able to define by actually going into this setting right here, then we want to notify the user with an email and a policy tip. Maybe it's 2 or 3 instances of that. But if it's a high volume, we want to notify them, restrict access to the content, and send an incident report to an administrator. Now, I can flip these priority-wise. I can flip the whatever I want to. I can actually come in here and also add additional sensitive information types and define how confident I want to be in the detection of one of those things. I can say that a high incidence of driver's license phone number incidents and incidents, it breaks my brain every time. How many instances then do we want to consider to be a high volume detection within this particular policy? 10 to any counts as a high volume, but maybe we decide that for social security numbers, our risk is a little bit higher for this one, so we want to set that one to 5. We can totally do that. We then need to go into the low volume one and set it to be 1 to 4, right? So we need to be a little bit, cautious about what we do, but you can see we have all of these things, all of these different sensitive information types, and they're all just pre-baked in here. I can add any one of the remaining 205 items that are out here, and I'll show you how we can work with those and get a little bit more information about how they work in just a second. But I can actually take all of these sensitive information types that are created as a group, and I can name this group, and I can also decide that I want to add an additional group of different sensitive information types and make this an and/or operator. So what am I going to do if I find 10 social security numbers or 10 credit card numbers versus 10 social security numbers and 10 credit card numbers, because maybe I have a compliance requirement to treat those differently, right? And then how is it, what is the action that's being done with them? Are they being shared with people inside or outside the organization? Do we want to allow exceptions? Yeah, sure, send it off to your personal email address. Why not, right? We can have fun with that. But then we also want to decide what to do with that content, right? Are we going to restrict access to that content? Are we going to block users from getting access to it, block everyone except for the owner, block just people outside the organization? Whom are we going to notify? Are we going to allow the users to define overrides? I mean, there's a lot of granularity, and this is not even the policy. This is the actions on a specific level of detection within the policy. So we've got a lot of different things that we can do here. But what I want to show you, though, is how we can actually work with specific different sensitive information types. So even though we haven't drained all of this area right here, we're going to come back to it in a second, because it's important to understand what it is that we're detecting against, right? It's all well and good to say, oh, we can't include social security numbers because that's a terrible no-no. But what is a social security number, and how does Microsoft detect against it? So for that, what we probably want to do is type social in the list of sensitive information types that are here. There's 205 items here. Microsoft has published 204 of these, and I've made a copy of one, and I've made a copy of it so we can break it open and take a look at it. But I'm going to search for social security numbers in this great big long list here, and there it is, US SSNs, and let's see, it detects formatted and unformatted US social security numbers, right? Here's an explanation of it. It's basing it on character proximity. Within 300 characters of each other, are we detecting social security number type data? And there's multiple patterns that are in here as well. And if we're still not convinced that this is going to work, we can actually take content that we already own and upload it and have it assess against this sensitive information type. This is not going to trigger any alerts. This is simply going to say, does this content match the way that we expect this data to be formatted? If we still can't get an answer that we want, the easiest thing to do is actually to make a copy of that, because you might notice in their default states they are not editable. If Microsoft has created it, they are not editable. But once I've created a copy, it says my copy was created. Would I like to edit it now? Yeah, that'd be great. Let's take a look and see. I don't have to hunt for it again, right? I mean, it's there. I know it's there. Okay, so it's going to pre-name it for me. No big deal. I'll move forward. Aha, here's where we get to our patterns. And this is where I can come in here and look at exactly what these patterns look like. And I can add supporting elements or groups or whatever I want to. I can change the confidence level. Let's see if we look at how that function is defined. Here we go. We have 178 functions that are predefined in here. Now, we're not going to go through 178 different functions. What I want you to understand, though, is that there are 204 predefined sensitive information types that are already out here for you. A lot of them are built on incredible complexity. For instance, if you ever decide to try to look into why you can't trip the credit card sensors with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, blah, 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 it's because the credit card numbers have to pass a test called, I believe, the Loon test that is baked into this sensitive information type. So like there's a lot of calculation that goes on to determine if the text patterns that you're using to test actually meet the real world patterns of that real valid content type. So you will not trigger these things by accident, which means lower false positives for you, which is fantastic. That's what we really want to drive at. So we've got our sensitive information types. Hey, while we're here, take a look at this. We can see how our users are applying our sensitive labels. We can see where retention labels and sensitivity are being defined. All this kind of fun stuff is in here. We're actually seeing the types of sensitive information that is being detected in our organization. And we can scroll, we click on the Content Explorer, and that's going to show us where we are finding these types of data, how much of it is hiding out here, how many Slovenian tax identifier numbers are out here, they're hiding in SharePoint, right? So we can actually do full content discovery against our organization simply by having these sensitive information types out here. Now, I'm going to jump back into the actual DLP tab because one of the nice things that also popped up was this ability to set up alerts. And we've had alerts, right? So it's not new. What this does though is it also surfaces alerts into this console if alerts are generated at all. Maybe the guy who's responsible for monitoring the alerts has been on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe he set up a filter that automatically just forwards all that stuff to trash. This will allow you to actually get in and actually see the alerts that are being generated to make sure that someone is able to take action on them. We can also then take a look and see what content has been flagged for DLP, whether it's been a violation or content has been automatically classified through policies or what. We're having files being read out here on endpoint devices, email being sent with a bunch of inappropriate data, right? Diego, what are you doing, right? Like, you're just going to call it that, an email? We have content that's being put into specific places in Exchange Online, but with the wrong label applied. And we're having other tools come back and label that content in place to make sure that the right people have the right access to it. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with this, but we can actually come in here and look and see exactly what this content is. There's Diego sending a bunch of inappropriate content, right? I'm going to be there. He didn't define any sensitivity on this thing. I mean, it's just open. Now, we can also set up that, like I said, we can put content into an Exchange Online repository and have that content get automatically labeled in place. This was a sensitivity label being automatically applied by Cloud App Security, and I'm hoping I'm going to get time to get to that in just a couple minutes too. But there is a lot of stuff that's going on here now that we don't have to go back and wonder or search through reports in protection.office.com that are completely divorced from the actual policy creation. It's all presented to us here in one convenient space. And yes, we can apply endpoint DLP settings so that we can decide that, like, content in specific files shouldn't be assessed. Users shouldn't be able to access our data with specific applications, or maybe they shouldn't be able to move things to remote devices with Bluetooth connections. We don't want to allow specific browsers to be able to get to our sensitive data. We can do a lot now with the actual endpoints. And then we can make sure that we're always auditing file activity for devices. And this is really cool because what that does is when a user marks a file as being like internal or sensitive or does something through an Azure information policy or Azure information protection policy, the stuff we covered back in February, the clicking on the label is now an audited event that gets populated here into this Activity Explorer in data classification. So Diego simply creating a Word document and hitting this is an internal document is an audited event that now gets put up here. And incidentally, all of this is building on each other, right? So these sensitive information types that are defining how our data loss prevention policies work are also baked into our Azure information protection or Microsoft information protection policies to define how content should be automatically labeled in place when it is detected. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff, right? So we can come in here and we can identify PII content based on the instance of a social security number in this content should cause this content to be automatically labeled as PII. The right people should not, or the wrong people shouldn't be able to gain access to it. Okay, so that's the basic workload level, right? We can do it at Exchange, we can do it at Teams, we can do it at SharePoint, we can do it at OneDrive, Cloud App Security, all this other kind of fun stuff. Incidentally, and I almost forgot about this because I did mention this in the blog, the classic Exchange mail flow rule, right? That's still a totally valid way to do this, right? We can actually do a ton of DLP capabilities with mail flow rules. So maybe you need something that's even more tailored or even more granular specifically for an Exchange workload that doesn't quite rise to the level of reporting through the same instances, right? We would just want to make sure that maybe there's no external sharing of the Australia medical account number. Right, we can actually come in here and say that if messages have that content in it and the recipient is outside the organization, we're going to reject the message with a no bad user notification, and we're gonna audit it, but we're not going to really chase that one down, right? We're going to enforce it, and that's it. We can do things like blocking specific file types from going outside the organization with mail flow rules. So the classic method that doesn't require any super crazy fancy licensing or anything, it still totally works. Just be aware it will only work for Exchange Online workloads. It will not flow through to other things. So you got to be granular. That's kind of a fun way to do it too. Now, I did say that we were going to get to Cloud App Security, and I got to remember which dashboard looks like which. At this point, I have so many fun dashboards opened up here. So what we're actually going to do is we're just going to go ahead and open it up. All right, we're still working with preventing accidental loss of content. So I've got Cloud App Security monitoring all of my cloud workloads, whether they're Office 365 workloads or they're, again, I had that enrolled instance of Box about a month ago, not a year ago. Wow, that would have been long ago. But I'm actually able to see all of the files across my entire digital estate, right? We've covered this before too, where if there's content that has this little tag on it that I know that that's protected with information protection. I do happen to know these specific 4 files here that automatically surface to the top because they're the most recent things to be done are the files that I intentionally tried to mishandle last night, I guess it was, but I made some tweaks to it. Yeah, there we go. Late last night. I was working after midnight. Yeah. Anyway, at 45, that's an achievement. So I got these 4 files that I mishandled intentionally, but not in a way that Exchange or SharePoint would care about. I just know that as a user, I put them in a place that was inappropriate for the way the organization wants to handle data. What I had then to do was to create a policy to make sure that if data got into that repository, it didn't stay that way. It didn't stay open and available for everybody to just go in and browse, right? I wanted to make sure that if somebody put content out there, it was going to get locked down. So what I did was I set up a policy that says auto classify HR content. So this one is simply looking at any content that goes into the folder all the employees were going to fire because maybe we don't want to broadcast that to the company. That was an oopsie. Well, I don't want Diego sharing that widely, so I simply say automatically apply a sensitivity label of highly confidential HR and override any other label he's already pre-chosen for it. And then we're gonna, we could go ahead and define a notification if we wanted to, but this is just a simple DLP policy. It's already matching on these 4 files. If I click on that, it's going to take me right back to those same files right there. And I can see, if I look at it, that these files are encrypted in place with the highly confidential HR. That was all programmatically handled. I put those files in there as Diego. In fact, as Diego, I mapped the folder structure into his Contoso space, created this HR, all the employees were going to fire, dumped a bunch of files into it, and they automatically got protected. Now, since we're talking about Diego, and we've talked about Diego a lot over the last several months, Diego also has a number of other restrictions imposed upon him. Diego's computer is a fully managed Microsoft 365 Azure AD and joined, Intune monitored, everything you want to do with it. And as a result, we've been able to configure Windows information protection policies to also make sure that the right data stays within the right apps, and that corporate data remains corporate data and personal data remains personal data, and never the twain shall meet. And the way that we show that to Diego, and we've talked about this before, but it's worth covering again because it all helps build that compliance package that we desperately need for our data, is this little briefcase. This website is managed by Contoso. And I'm going to see that briefcase popping up in all of Diego's corporate managed applications. There's the briefcase right there. If I, as Diego, copy this content right here, and I then open up Chrome, right? And I'm just going to not even go into the Gmail, process that I usually do. You're going to notice there's no briefcase in Chrome. There's no briefcase here in New Tab. We're just going to paste, and right there, it's going to tell me your organization doesn't allow you to use work content in this application. This is a mechanism of DLP. It's not the DLP as part of the engine that is defined in the compliance.microsoft.com thing, but this is a mechanism. Windows Information Protection is a mechanism defined the exact same way as DLP. It's a tool intended to prevent accidental data loss. That's DLP, right? So all of these things are working together to make sure that Diego, when he wants to work with the files that he has access to from the company, they have these nice little briefcase icons on them. If he wants to try to change that and make it a personal file, he doesn't have the authority to. If it's inside of his downloads directory, we've given Diego the authority to, we actually took that away from Diego because he was being sneaky with it. His downloads directory on his PC is not a managed part of Windows Information Protection, but the content that he has pulled from our repositories, he cannot change the file ownership and make these things personal. They stay work files. He can always decide that this personal file, he wants to make this a work file, but once he does that, there's no going back, right? So again, we can have that clear separation of work versus personal. And the last thing that I really want to cover in this is that we also can build on all of these things with the traditional components of Azure Active Directory, of conditional access policies, and also we'll cover a tiny bit in Defender for Endpoint because there's a cool capability there too. So within Azure Active Directory, right, we have conditional access policies, and I've demoed this thing a million times over, 100 different ways, but it's absolutely worth knowing that you can achieve a lot of really additional beneficial controls by simply making sure that your conditional access policies match the way you expect your users to work, right? In this case, we have said block downloads from personal devices in SharePoint. And if I were to open the SharePoint directory here, it's going to tell me right up here, and this is actually coming from two different directions, my organization doesn't allow me to download, print, or sync using this device. This is my Synergy device accessing Contoso SharePoint. I can't download from here, right? If I try to download, if I hit, it's not even there. It's not even there, right? It doesn't even surface as an available control for me now. And this is a combination of having the conditional access policy, but there's actually controls within SharePoint for defining how users should be able to gain access to your file and move it outside of your organization. And the last thing I'm going to cover, because we are at 30 minutes, is that we also have the ability from within Defender for Endpoint, which is now part of the security.microsoft.com experience. We've already defined in Windows Information Protection the company websites that Diego is allowed to go to. And we've already defined some proxy controls within Defender for Endpoint for like website types that he's not allowed to go to. But I can also see that Diego is going to specific websites that I don't want him to go to at all. I can define those as custom network indicators of compromise. It was Alan DeYoung that went to this website. And I can see that he tried from within a browser session embedded in Teams to try to go to a cloudflare.com page. Now, if I look in my settings for Defender for Endpoint, I'm going to see that I have defined Cloudflare.com as a custom indicator of compromise. What that really allows me to do as an admin, okay, sure, maybe it's a malware site, but maybe I've got a personal reason why I say, hey, listen, we know that there's been some sharing in the past with this external website, and we're just going to cut that off, right? You're not going to be allowed to go there from within your managed device for Contoso. So, is that all of DLP? Oh, heavens no. There's so much, but we've already built on the content that we've covered in the Microsoft Information Protection space back in February. We've built on those sensitive information types. We've added content into automatic labeling, automatic detection. We've covered a little bit about data classification and the fact that every single click regarding classification and every single automated action is processed and compiled and presented here. I absolutely do intend to come back around and talk about Compliance Manager in the very near future. I'm waiting for one last feature to pop up in my tenant. But that kind of brings us to where we are going to call it today. Happy to open it up for any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, that was a lot. I'm hearing a little thing. Sorry, I was like, where am I hearing that from? I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A chat right now. If you want to learn more, so there is a DLP blog post you can find on our website for more information, as well as the recordings for Azure Active Directory and the AIP webinars that Adrian referenced. You can find the recordings on our events page. But okay, wait, I'm seeing a quick one. So Adrian, with all of the various components that you discussed, I know it was a lot. So where would one start? Like, where does one start?
Okay. I honestly, I can't believe you asked that exact question, because if you do click on the what's new in compliance.microsoft.com, so literally, if you come here and click on home and click on what's new, that's the actual place that it takes you to, is multiple starting points. And I have to agree, you're probably going to want start with a platform focus, right? We talked about the fact that, organizations that have been doing DLP for years have generally started with mail flow rules. So what we generally see is that there's an understanding that DLP applies to mail. Okay, fine. Let's get that squared away. Then, we're onboarding teams. Let's add that in too. And we can do that as an addition to the same policy that we already have, or we can build on additional policies. What I didn't cover is that when you are deploying these policies, you do want to make sure that you're rolling them out in a staged and predictable way. So if I come in and look at any one of these policies, it's going to generally, when I create them, get to the point where I can show you this. When I create these policies, it's going to give me the option to turn it on or test it. I always recommend that you guys start with these things in test, but test silently first, right? Do it, collect the information as the administrator for a brief period of time, see what kind of false positives and real positives you're going to get. Then turn on the show policy tips in test mode to let your users know, as part of a communication plan, right, that we're going to start doing something. This gives them the ability to actually have an investment in the process themselves. And then once you've gotten the false positives down, the user is invested in doing it, that's when you turn on the active policy. So we can do it by workload, but I'm also going to recommend that you test, notify, then enact.
Awesome. And then there was another question. Does this require an E5 license?
So we've covered a lot of different areas around DLP. I would throw that back and say depends on the E5 you're talking about and the area that you're talking about. Certainly creating policy reports or policies out of Microsoft Cloud App Security to add additional governance controls for what to do with content detected in, say, Box. Then you're looking at something that includes the full Microsoft Cloud App Security suite. If you're looking at doing DLP for Exchange and that's it, actually you don't really need much of anything other than Exchange, because it still does mail flow rules, right? You can absolutely do that without any change to your licensing status, assuming you're already in the cloud. The other workloads that you want to monitor, it's going to need to have workloads for that. adding all of this stuff into the compliance overall offering, depending on how much reporting and how much granularity you're going to want to get into with it, it may require additional tweaks in licensing. But it's kind of one of those it depends answers. So yeah, clear as mud.
Well, and that was a perfect question to lead into, as our good friend Dan's reminder, to reach out. If you reach out to your AE, I know we have helped a lot of large organizations through a lot of these initiatives.